Good afternoon and welcome to episode 30 of International Expansion Explained. Today, we're going to talk about the secrets, which I hope Benji is going to divulge to us, of thriving in Vietnam's consumer goods market. Now, my guest today is Benji Lamb, who is founder and CEO at Asia Circles, which is an accelerator and incubator for companies looking to enter the Southeast Asian and Chinese markets. In the past, he's worked with companies like the GMA Marketing Agency in China, as well as Vitabiotics, a supplement brand where he was also a UK Department of Trade export champion for several years. He's one of those people with a LinkedIn blue top voice badge, and I did hear somewhere along the line that he's not ashamed to admit to a love of bubble tea. Benji, thank you for joining me.
I love bubble tea. I think my love of bubble tea started in Shanghai. Like lines outside the best bubble tea stores. Like, what is this? I love the texture. I don't have as much sugar. I take my sugar level down and I increase my ice level usually. But no, I love bubble tea. So I even put that on my bio. Very corporate.
Yeah. But maybe you can explain to us as a start, because it was quite a, let's say, quite a corporate introduction apart from the bubble tea, obviously. But how did you actually get into international business? And what brought you more or less to the point that we're at today? So fill us in a bit on the details.
Yeah, of course. So I was out of university and had a little bit of an existential crisis, like I think many students do after finishing their BA or their MA, right? Their Bachelors of Arts or their Masters. And we went to a fair and we initially wanted we both did TEFL courses, teaching English as a foreign language. And we initially wanted to go to South Korea because we'd looked at pictures and it looked pretty, and the skyline of Seoul looked really cool. That's the extent
Yeah.
of the research,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then
True
as
student
good a
style.
reason as any. So so then we started trying to find now the private schools in South Korea are called Hagwons, and the Hagwons they all wanted American English teachers because they wanted American English taught, not English. Because I obviously speak the Queen's English, and I'm from Southeast England, and so we really struggled to get a job in South Korea. Actually, we couldn't get one in Seoul, and there were a couple, and they were like, "Oh, you can sleep in your classroom. We'll pull the mattress out, and you can do take your lessons in the day, and then you can literally this is where you sleep." And in some national park or other. We said, no, that's not going to work. So we just went, oh, my research here was what's a cool skyline that's near Seoul. Now, Shanghai is arguably one of the coolest skylines in the world, right? So you go across on Google Maps and you see the Pearl Oriental Tower, the
Yep.
bulb and the stick that goes up. And we just go, oh, that'll do. That looks cool. So then we managed to get, long story short, we got a job teaching English in China as a foreign language. We were in kindergarten schools.
Okay.
I have no background in export at this point, and but my I've got a lot of time because my lessons don't start till about 3 o'clock. So I tend to teach because it's after the Chinese school day.
After
So
school.
we
Yeah.
would yeah, so we would pick up at 3 and we teach through to about 8, killing time as an English teacher. Um, so I got I mean this was a really really exciting time to be in China. It would have been it would have been about 13 years ago, about 13, 14 years ago. Um, so yeah, tell me the date of that. 2000 and something. What what would
2010,
that be?
2011, something like
2010,
that. Yes.
2011, right? So it was a digital boom. It was an e-commerce boom, and you just felt part of this groundswell, and I just remember finding it so interesting, like I was on some kind of like digital safari. So I just go, like, wow, this is this whole new ecosystem. It's like a different fish tank. I feel like a fish in a different tank. And I applied, I think, for something like 8 or 9 or 10 different marketing agencies. No experience as an intern, and one of them took me on. That was the GMA group. But
Hmm.
the GMA group obviously grew to be very large. But when I started, it was 5 people unboxing in a box office in Shanghai, a proper startup. The boxes were on the floor. They were still like pulling the PCs out the boxes, and there was a French founder and a Chinese founder, and then like a couple of other Chinese guys. And I said, I don't know anything about digital e-commerce, but I want to learn. I'll work for you for nothing as an
Hmm.
intern. They said, no, you don't need to work for nothing. We'll pay you 1,000 RMB a month, just like $130 or
Money,
something a
big
month.
money.
You know, and you can be and they said to learn, you can be a copywriter. So you're going to go out, you're just going to write about the Chinese ecosystem. And so that sounds great. That's amazing because I have all my teaching hours. So I would go into school and I would just write as a copywriter. So it'd be like research Weibo. What is Weibo? It means microblog in Chinese. All this is obvious to a lot of people now, right? But at this time, it was like top line content on Chinese digital platforms was really all the rage. And there wasn't necessarily so many people talking about this. So I would just write long form blog posts, and then I started getting into the kind of LinkedIn game where I was probably one of now there's so many China watchers, but
Yeah,
honestly back then I was probably in the very, very early phase of the China watchers on LinkedIn, like probably maybe one of the first like 10 doing it. 5, 10
right.
doing it, and I just, be like, here's a picture of Alibaba shaking hands with someone at Starbucks, and you would get like 500 likes, like it was just that kind of, there was such euphoria around China, and it was kind of right place, right time, I felt, in a lot of ways, because we were on the ground, we were living it, we were breathing it, we were foreigners, so we had that perspective, but we had Chinese teams that we could immerse ourselves with and in, to better understand the ecosystem. So that's how I started. The story goes on, but I don't know if
Yeah,
you were going
and
to ask something else.
I guess also at the time, geopolitically, then it was also a completely different thing between Western Europe and North America and China. There wasn't quite such that amount of tension. There was a much more euphoric, much more positive attitude also in the media towards China at that
Very
time, at least
positive.
in Europe. Everything was
Very, and likewise, very positive in China as well. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
quite hard to it's quite hard to explain it. So there'll be a lot of people who listen to what you do who either have lived in China maybe around that time or know people who did. So there's a lot of stories, but it was such the optimism, the potentiality in everything was just incredible. I don't
yeah.
know if it was
The
like being
energy.
in the energy, bear in mind that around this time, 50% of the world's concrete was going into Shanghai. That's 50% of the world's concrete production for X number of years within that period I was there was going into Shanghai. So this was just the whole thing was going up. They went from something like 10 scrapers to 400-500 scrapers, didn't they? Within,
Yeah,
you can get all these stats elsewhere, macro stats, but let's say within a decade or something like that. But it felt, I'm speaking more to the feeling, of
yeah.
of being on the ground, and I think that kind of then soaks into you as an entrepreneur, where you go, this things are just possible,
Yes,
you can just
yes.
build things, and this agency goes from 5 people to 85 people to 125 people to 145 people. Boom, 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 boom. And it does it probably in like 3.5 years. And these stories,
Yeah,
and you say that to people, they go, really? You go, oh yeah, all the agencies were doing it. All of the
yeah.
company, like it was commonplace that agencies. This was the kind of era where Mailman started. And look what happened to Mailman. Huge success story. But it was like these agencies were going from 5 to 25 to 45 to 65 to 95 and it would just. I remember going to. We keep stepping up offices. Every like 6 to 9 months there'd be some new office lease because the agency would
You grew
outgrow it,
outgrew. Yeah,
just outgrowing the offices because the budgets were so humongous. There was so much from a brand perspective. Everyone wanted to invest in China. It
yeah.
wasn't a hard sell, and you when you were selling, we were selling things like WeChat activations and Baidu SEM and SEO, Chinese search SEM and SEO, and Weibo like SMP social media plans on Weibo and Red and Xiaohongshu and then e-commerce obviously on Tmall JD, and at that time there wasn't even TikTok, there wasn't Douyin. It was in its
No, it
infancy
was,
when I started, and we
yeah,
I
it wasn't.
watched
It
Douyin
wasn't a
develop.
marketing channel as such, was it, at that particular time?
It was
Not
a
in the beginning.
social channel. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
When we were there, it started in ByteDance's garage, and
Mhm.
I remember all the stories of Tencent and Alibaba trying to acquire it. So because they were in a huge fight where they would just acquire everything, and
Yeah.
when one would acquire something, the other would acquire a similar profile business, and they were fighting over ByteDance. And I remember there were so many stories around that, and this kind of visionary founder of ByteDance, which became the global sensation that is TikTok, would just refuse to be bought. So it's
Yeah.
just super inspiring, actually. But yeah, I remember watching that algorithm develop. So I was also in China for the birth of live streaming, effectively,
Yep. Hmm.
like which was on Taobao live
Yeah.
streaming.
Taobao
So
live stream, yeah.
so we could have rode all these waves, and it was super exciting, and I think it's kind of seeped into me, that sense of possibility. Like, I mean, it's anecdotally, but like I remember signing this startup called Gym Bunnies. No disrespect to Gym Bunnies, but it was a very, very small vitamin company.
Hmm.
Who knows where Gym Bunnies is today? I hope it's hugely successful and she's listening, and it's a multi-billion VMS company. But it was a garage startup. And then you go from that, and then say within 6 months, we signed Vitabiotics for the agency. And Vitabiotics are one of Europe's largest vitamins companies, the largest
Yep.
in the UK,
Hmm.
number one in vitamins and supplements. And it was just so much potential. And I think that's the thing that's carried through, kind of not just those early, we're talking about as kind of early days, really, of working for Chinese startups, but then carried through into my work with Vitabiotics, which we scaled into I mean, if you'd have told that English teacher, when he landed in Shanghai, that he was gonna take one of the largest UK companies and scale it to $40 million retail, which was published, but it went bigger, but it was published at 40 million. So maybe I can't say the bigger figure, but it was 40 million plus dollars retail value business in China. Like, I would have just gone, no, you're insane.
Yep. Yep.
And I think, but that's I think what seeps into you, and I'll always be grateful to China for that. When I
Yes.
go back to
Yeah.
Shanghai, I still
Same
feel it
here.
somewhat. I'll always be so grateful for that potentiality, and how welcoming and warm it was, and how receptive it was. And it really was. It really felt like a golden era. And I'm sure the decade before, lots of people also report that felt like a golden era. I think it was within that kind of 20-year window of really golden. And yeah, so I
Yes.
feel really grateful
Being able to be part of that.
to have lived that in my
Yeah.
business life.
I know for me too that at that kind of time, I remember handing over a plan for the following year that involved doubling, I think, what we'd done in that particular year. And the management just saying to me, no, 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 can't do that. That's just unrealistic. Put in 2% growth. And I was just like, no, 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 no. So I might have revised it to like 50% growth, and then it got revised back down again by the top management to something. It was double figures, but it wasn't like massive. And by March, we were in a situation of telling people, we're not sure how much product we can supply you with for the rest of the year because you're just blowing everything out of the water, and our production can't keep up. you know and
That was a common. I mean, they were good problems to have, right?
yeah,
But
exactly.
exactly. I mean, it became. I think that's a really great. I think actually what you're touching on is almost became the crux of the problem, and this is a good problem to have, which is that European and American brands, they couldn't actually keep up, so their supply chains weren't set up for that kind of influx of volume. So one of the biggest fights we had at Vitabiotics was actually building the right supply chain for China.
Yeah.
We did it basically through creating China codes. So we created a production code which was specific for China, and then it would roll off the manufacturing line. It would hit the warehouse. It would be exactly matched to the UK codes, but it just so and it was also UK applicable stock, but it just meant that we could just send it straight off the warehouse floor.
Yeah.
And we had a hybrid where we used UK codes because obviously the most stock was in the UK, and China specific codes for production. But yeah, these were the kind of problems. And then culturally, you had to really fight culturally because it needed such a level of kind of prioritization within an organization. So
Yeah.
you had to really fight for that. And I was always, and this
Against
is
the home
mass
market.
yeah, against I mean, really, it was UK and China, really, like,
Hmm.
and huge respect and props to the CEO of Vitalbotics who just backed it. That's why Vitalbotics was such a success. Because I went on, from the agency, I went in house to Vitalbotics, as a director of China, and then director of China and South Asia. And then that's where in those 4 years we took the business, I mean, probably from about 5 million retail, as I say, to 40 million retail USD plus. So, and then eventually it became the number one export market for
Very cool.
Vitalbiotics. So it really was quite a tremendous journey, and it felt so personal, and invested so much into it. It was so passionate, and it just. But it's really inspiring, and I'm super grateful for that. Because that then leads that all of those experiences then give me the confidence eventually to start my own company, right? So
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
you can't take the pieces of the puzzle out. It's all interconnected, isn't it? But yeah, it
Definitely.
really is. I mean, did you spend time in Shanghai in that era? Like, did you on the ground?
I mean, I was in and out of China every month. So I
Oh,
was
so you
visit
very well. Yeah.
so I was partly in Shanghai. In the beginning I wasn't that much in Shanghai. I was more, we did a lot of stuff in the region. So I was traveling provinces, visiting provincial distributors, that kind of thing. And I had importers in Guangzhou and in Shenzhen. So it wasn't but obviously Shanghai was the place to do events and to run press conferences and all of those kind of things. So yeah. And if you needed to go into Alibaba, then of course you kind of came through Shanghai to go down to
Yeah.
Hangzhou and
Mm.
those kind of things. But I never actually had an apartment on the ground, although we did talk about it at one point.
Because you were there so much.
Because I was there so much. Often I was there, like I was spending like 3 months of every year in China, but just commuting to and fro. So yeah, it was kind of a crazy time.
I think like it's what I try to retain, and I really try to retain this running Asia Circles, my own business as well, is that like childhood sense of wonder at things, like trying to have fun. Because
Hmm.
it's so easy when you're just drowning in paperwork and administration and management and everything to kind of forget that actually like this, like organizations can be really inspiring. Like a business can be such an inspiring tool or like kind of structure to bring people together and kind of collaborate on something and develop yourself and develop other people. And I know it's a really obvious thing to say, but I have to remind myself of the obvious things,
Yes.
right? Because
It
it's
sounds
easy
like,
to lose sight of that, I think, and I think that again is almost a China spirit for me because it's optimism is tangible and it's infectious. So if you bring that mindset into other markets like Vietnam and into Southeast Asia, which I know we'll go on to, but like you can really plug into that same kind of optimistic energy, I guess.
yeah. And I mean, to some extent, that is one thing that I feel that China has lost a little bit, or has lost quite a lot of, not entirely, but that has changed. And for me, at least, I feel a lot more that you've got that spirit much more now in Vietnam compared to, Vietnam is let's say 20 years behind China in many things on their economic development, not in everything, but in lots of aspects. Um, and consequently, it's also that question, if we just kind of move across to Vietnam, why do you feel, I mean, I have my opinion, but why do you feel that Vietnam is the right market for consumer brands rather than, say, Thailand? I mean, in the past few years, lots of people or lots of companies, they see Vietnam as that auxiliary plus one, China plus one
Mm.
market base for their manufacturing. But I think historically, less companies have seen it as being a place to actually sell. They've seen it as somewhere to produce rather than as a sales market.
Yeah, I think this is the really exciting story that's being told. Um, it's first off, it's the feeling. First off, it's the feeling. It's the same feeling you get when you land in Shanghai in 2011. You go to Ho Chi Minh, you feel it. You feel it. It's a mishmash of sounds and sights and smells and optimism. It's potentiality. You can physically see it in the buildings that go up. You know, within a visit to a visit, you see the construction. You know, and I think a lot of it is actually getting, much like with China's success, getting directors and decision makers and CEOs on the ground, getting them into Ho Chi Minh because
Yeah.
they'll feel it and they'll see it. Touring retail, and I think that's what it was for me. You don't invest on paper. You know, like you invest based on a lived experience, I think, really, to tangibly feel and get
Yeah.
excited about something. And I've got so many examples of brands that have come in and now they're so passionate about the Vietnamese market because they get it. And yeah, I mean, for me, it is the emerging market of Southeast Asia. I don't think it is. I think it is. I don't think at all it's just an auxiliary market to China. I think those days are done. I think it stands alone in its own right as a consumer market. I don't think it is just a price sensitive market, which is also how it's been positioned. I think historically is very price sensitive. I think you've got rapidly rising middle classes, approximately 30 million Vietnamese estimated to enter the relative middle class within the next X decades, right? Which is a third of the population. So you're seeing upward mobility. You're seeing, I think, and why I find it really inspiring, because I've read up quite a lot on the history of Vietnam, as I've read up quite a lot on the history of China. They have China and Vietnam do have that intertwined history, right?
Yeah.
But Vietnam as a country historically has been very suppressed
Yes.
and has suffered a lot. And it's quite harrowing reading the modern history of Vietnam actually. Like it's suffered, there's been so much internal, and it's too complex to unpack on something like this, but there's been so much internal and external strife around that country, you know. And I just think like, and maybe this also connects to my personal story, but I just think like this country really deserves to fly. Like it really deserves for its star to rise, right? And I
Mhm.
love that image because of the star, and it feels like the Vietnam star is rising, you know, and I think the people feel that, and they feel proud of it, and their lives are going to get better. They're going to get tangibly better because of this economic growth, and that I just find that really inspiring.
Mhm.
And I think it connects. It makes me feel emotional because I think it connects to my own desire to better myself and to grow myself and to improve my opportunity and my mental health and my physical health and my well-being in the world. You know, so there's something quite deep in that connection that and that's how I've related to it. And I know I'm not alone because you meet so many inspiring international expats and so many inspiring Vietnamese who feel it too, you
Yes.
know,
Yes.
and I so that's why I come back to the feeling because it all starts there, I think. And then I go, well, let's explore because I've got 5 years of China experience, you know, and it's a pretty intense crash course in commercial experience doing business in China, right? You know, you're running at scale, it's high risk by nature because it's high volume. It's very demanding. You run at what people would often call China speed. So
Yes.
I ran a team of 30 people. So we had our own team of 30 people just for China. So I adapted to that kind of sense of China speed. Um, and I think it's yeah, I think it's just a great training ground for doing business in wider APAC. And plus, there's so many transferable skills. For example, in social commerce in Southeast Asia, we see the huge rise of TikTok Shop and Shopee live streaming. A lot of those algorithms, as we know, underpinning TikTok Shop, is Chinese algorithms. You know, so we've been operating live streams in China at large scale for years, for years. So I think like there's a technical element which we can apply to these markets in terms of best practices and understanding, but also we stay humble, really humble, because it's going to be so much local nuance and local reception and then local adaptation of these social commerce technologies in a market like Vietnam. We're just dialing on Vietnam, but Malaysia, you can make the same statement about Malaysia. TikTok
Yeah.
Shop is rising rapidly in Malaysia, so in this wider kind of SEA region. um, and I think, yeah, so it starts with the feeling, and then it gets into the more technicals, and then it gets into more just tour retail. Go and look at how innovative these retail formats are and these retail stores are, and look at the investment and look at the number of stores, look at the locations, and going to the offices, like you get into the head offices and you meet the commercial heads and the category managers. They're really innovative, and they feel that same growth. They
Yeah.
they feel that same opportunity, and there's still space, there's still green or blue space for brands within their categories. And that's really exciting, because I think as people, category managers in modern trade, they're looking to make an impact within their organization. So, like, there's still space for them to have to make their mark, right? I'm going to find this kind of category brand, and I'm going to bring it in. And it's a human project, isn't it?
It
So
is.
what I'm trying to do is tie it back to humans and feelings, because that's actually what it's all about. And the kind of technical understanding of retail and social commerce, which we've built over the years with Asia Circles, that's actually second to the understanding of the human, basically. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And for me, it's interesting because for me, Vietnam came before China in my professional journey. So
Oh
I
yeah.
was working in Vietnam for maybe 5 or 6 years before I ever went to China, um, which made for an interesting combination of things because I'd worked in Vietnam and Taiwan before that.
Mm.
But yeah, like you say, there's been such huge changes in the Vietnamese market. And I feel that that pace of change has really, really accelerated in the past 7 or 8 years. Before that, things they were changing, but it wasn't such a fast transition as we've seen in the past few
Mm.
years. And so, I mean, I wanted to ask you whether you've felt, because this year there's been a lot of like political changes, government changes, and so on. And in some ways, the government in Vietnam, they don't actually have that much impact on day to day business operations. But of course, if you're importing goods, then you've got to go through that registration process before you do. So, has that actually had an impact on the brands that you're taking care of and that you're running? Or has it been business as usual? The bureaucrats run it and the politicians do what they like at the top?
Not yeah. From what we see, I feel like it's a very stable environment in Vietnam to do business. We've only benefited from duties and tariffs because of the fantastic free trade agreements
Yeah.
that Vietnam has entered into. So just take the UK as example. You've got the UK to Vietnam FTA, free trade agreement. Then you've got the CCPIT, right, which is a whole
Yep.
membership country free trade agreement. So in terms, I mean, directly, there's instant benefits in terms of duties, right, and encouragement of import and export. But no, I don't feel. I genuinely, I've really have nothing negative to say on this. Like, I feel like it's really conducive to doing business. I feel like very safe, very stable doing business in Vietnam. I think that's actually really important for brands to understand. And I feel like it is professionalizing as well. So
Yes.
Vietnam used to be known as a one container, and that's not a slight. It was a common expression. It was a one container market, and I think that would also apply to other SCA nations as well. But
Yep.
what I mean by one container market is a distributor does general trade. They buy as cheap as they can, one container. They sell it as cheap as they can. They put the money in their pocket. Then they go to another brand and they
Yep.
dump you. So effectively, they just flush your stock for quick money. So, I mean, that's the opposite of what brands want and need. It's yeah, so everything I'm passionate about is around brand equity and long-term sustainable growth and pricing structure and omni-channel brand equity. And to do that, you need to invest.
Yeah.
So I think there is a real professionalization going on in the distribution industry in Vietnam, and I think brands understand that they need to invest in building brand equity. Now, what are the best channels to build brand equity? In my view, it's not general trade. If you're selling through general trade, you don't have transparency in your price structure. You don't have transparency on where those goods are being sold. Um, there's grey third party markets. It's not clear enough. Whereas if you're selling through modern trade, you
Hmm.
have all those things: proper price structure, omni store locations, the best locations for the right footfall, with the right shelf space. That's how you build brand. And then with the right investment in trade activation within those modern trade stores. And the other arena to build brand equity is e-commerce.
Yes.
Because again, you're selling on Shopee and TikTok shops, you've got flagship store presence, you're going direct to consumer, you control the retail pricing. You can obviously reclaim some of that margin by going direct versus, say, a modern trade margin, and you get your blended margins across both e-commerce and modern trade retail. And that's how you build brand equity. And then once you've established a brand with a proper price structure, then of course, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing general trade, Prince fundamentally, but
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 you've
I'm
got to
saying
do the rest first. You've got to
for
have the
the
foundation before
you've
you
got to
can.
have an infrastructure. Exactly. You've got to have an infrastructure, and you need to do that in the most professionalized, brand centric way. And the format to do that is, for me, is modern trade and e-commerce.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a good way forward. Although, let's say, looking at Vietnam's modern trade ecosystem, then you also have to, let's say, look at exactly where is the right place for your brands to be, because there are options out there who are more, let's say, who stand closer to the state, and there are options out there who are, let's say, are not quite so stuffy dusty in their approach to doing things, and where
I
it's
think
more
that's a really great point. Yeah. It's not okay. I'm not saying for a second it would be, well, okay, there's 100, for example, say Guardian, there's 125 stores approximately for Guardian. I'm not saying you'd launch in all 125 stores.
no.
Right. I'm saying you launch in, say, let's take that example. I would suggest you launch in the best performing 40 to 50 of those stores, because it's
Yeah.
much better to launch in fewer stores and have better sell through, and then invest more precisely in your modern trade activation within those stores, whether that's gondola ends, ceiling fans, barkers,
Nipple.
end of aisles, whatever, in trays, whatever, right? It's better to get that trade activation right, cashiers, etc. Um, and then once you've got that initial sell through, then roll out to more store locations. So it's a very scalable model, and it can be done step by step by step. And they're not astronomical costs to
Not
launch in
compared
modern
to
trade.
Europe. Not
No,
compared
it's
to.
really not. It's not
Yeah.
astronomical.
But I think that what companies do also have to remember, and I'm sure that that is something that you're able to support your clients and your brands with, is the fact that companies often, they want to expand very quickly. They want to have very, let's say, quite high numbers in terms of points of sale, but then they don't realize that they don't actually know enough details as to whether those points of sale, whether the product's rotating off the shelf, and then they get into problems with their supply chains, because it's still a long supply chain to get the product out to Vietnam, or it's expensive to fly it in. So having that kind of restricted, like you said, 40 or 50 outlets in the first place, and then taking it step by step, when you've got the experience of what are your hero products, or which
Exactly,
products are
exactly.
maybe not
Test
going
and
to turn
learn.
over so fast. I mean, especially I'm doing a lot with food and beverage, especially if you've got that shelf life topic, then you don't want too much product in country, do you? In an Asian market.
No, I think that's smart. And I think, like, just because you also don't make the mistake in thinking just because you're on a shelf, you're going to sell, you know? So you have your foundation in modern trade, and then the real work begins, because you've got to build a brand. You've got to build a brand, and that's the exciting bit, and that's around KOL, an influencer, a micro KOL, and KOCs, and digital assets you create, and a good social media plan, and e-commerce can be a great kind of cross-referencing for brand equity building as well, right? The kind of layout that you on the store formats you use, and there's so many dimensions to a brand launch. But I'm talking about getting the first step right, and then you build upon that. Plus, you've then got a lot of offline asset which you can leverage online, and then a lot of online asset you can leverage offline. So that kind of classic O2O, and I think that's why Vietnam is very exciting, because I've had my head in China a long time, but let's just consider it, right? Most brands would sell cross-border e-commerce into China. So you're not selling domestic e-commerce, you're selling cross-border e-commerce. So you're selling in a very small pool of even the e-commerce market, right?
Yeah.
You may be selling in what, five, depending on the product category, what, 5 to 10% approximately of the total e-commerce market. Now those figures will vary by probably significantly by product category, but let's just say as an example, 5 to 10%. Then there are certain limitations in China around what functional claims you can make about the product, because it's cross-border. So
Yeah.
you haven't registered the goods. So you're somewhat limited in what marketing you can employ in China as well, right? Now, if you then switch that to Vietnam, whilst it's not at 1.8 billion population, it's 100 million, you can sell both offline and online, omni-channel, and once you've got the registration through your master importer, like you said, you have an importer of record, master importer, and then they build out the distribution network. You can make functional claims about the product. So when you consider that, although it's a smaller relative pool of population, there's a lot of creativity in the marketing and the placement of ads, and the kind of innovation around product. And so I think that's a really exciting thing about Southeast Asia, actually. Once brands have got over the initial barrier. Now, how hard is the barrier? Because you mentioned earlier about, say, Thailand. I mean, Vietnam, I think, is very attractive because it's not that hard a
No,
barrier to
it's
enter.
not that hard to do.
It's
No.
not that hard a barrier to enter. I mean, Singapore's always going to be the easiest.
Yep.
And then I would say kind of Malay, depending on the category, Vietnam or Malaysia are probably number two, depending on the category.
Yeah, I would say Malaysia is a good one. If Although it can be complex, if we're talking food and beverage, it depends if you're talking
Depends on the
cosmetics,
category, yeah.
skincare, supplements, that kind of thing, or if you're talking food and beverage. And if you're talking food and beverage, then obviously you've also got that thing of, if you're talking meat or dairy or baby, then all of them are going to be more complicated than you're used to at home. But some of them will be horrible, and that includes Thailand and Indonesia and the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But Vietnam, I would say relatively in this mix, if I were to
Yes.
identify three, I would say Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam are on the easier side
Yeah.
of access across
Yes.
all product categories, actually. Halal certification is not a huge issue,
No.
as long as you're going through certain approved Yakim halal providers. And Vietnam it's really not. I mean, there are still bureaucracies, but when you've got a good registration partner, and actually, to be really honest, most of the slowdown is not the Vietnamese side. It's actually in the home country often, from my experience, because you're trying to get your letter of authorization legalized, for example, at an embassy. That is actually the bigger obstacle than processing the documents in Vietnam for your master import for the importation license.
Or when you've got, for example, it's not necessarily at the brand end of it, it's when you need documents legalized from your 5 contract producers who all don't understand that they need to have exactly the same wording, and let's say across all of the documents. So whatever the brand has submitted as, this is the name of the product, including any shortened words in order to make space in their SAP system or in whatever their ERP system is. If the producer has a different method of shortening the word with or shortening the word the, then that also the authorities will kick it out. And I think it's those kind of really little things that sometimes cause a lot of time, because
Mm.
in the home country they don't really understand why it's a big deal, because for them it's not a big deal.
But also, yeah, I agree. And I think like barriers become an opportunity, don't they? It just depends how you view barriers. Do you view them as, well, I now can't enter that market, or do you say, well, there's going to be fewer competitors because there's a barrier? And I think that for me, that's what makes it really exciting. And you don't feel like there's barriers. I mean, Vietnam, it's not always. I think Thailand have put up the taller walls in terms of market access and regulation. Vietnam have not got those walls, and you don't feel that when you're in market. And the retailers are really, really actively now. I think from my experience, the retailers are very receptive to new brand. It doesn't mean they necessarily go out. Retailers don't tend to approach brands, right? They might for
No,
major,
no.
major multinationals, but it doesn't mean that they don't want you to fit within their category if you're doing something innovative. Um, and these modern trade outlets have scale. There's scale because you can work out your pipe fill. You can go, I'm doing this many stores, work out your pipe fill. You can do a conservative pipe fill, a realistic pipe fill, an optimistic pipe fill, and you get a very clear sense of your numbers. And then it's very easy to tie that against the performance of your digital activation as well, right?
Yeah,
Because you've got clear metrics for your growth, and the costs really, really are not astronomical. I mean, like, this is just indicative, but I'll say a retailer. This is indicative, but a retailer, if you were going to activate 40 to 50 stores, gondola ends in those stores, a combination of full gondola ends and a first tray gondola end, which is a poster and the first tray,
mhm,
and you were to run that for 6 months in this example retailer, you'd probably be only spending between 25 to $30,000 for 6 months. It's not a lot
not
for 40,
not in the
40 to
greater
50
scheme of
stores.
things. No, it
It's
is
not a lot. It's not a
for a
lot. I
country with
mean,
100 million population. That's
yeah,
the other.
it's
You could spend it in.
and you could spend that in a single digital activation somewhere,
Yeah,
which would last you a number of days, let alone 6 months. Plus, you've then, as I say, got a foundation. Plus, you've got the rising middle classes, and if they want that kind of quality product, brand endorsed products with the best visuals and the best creatives in store, they're going to go to those modern trade outlets, and that'd be the same mother baby. You've got the supreme rise of Concun. Remember, you were saying about how when you were there,
yeah.
was it
With
Kids
people marts
Plaza
and
or
so on. Yeah,
Bimbo Mart?
yeah,
Yeah, so like the rise of players that are big omni-channel players like Concord, who are also going to moving into lifestyle. They're heading towards a 300 store, right? So this is huge. These are the outlets that mothers are going and families are going to buy quality Vietnam domestic and international products. The rise of Guardian from 0 to 125 plus stores. The likes of Annam, who are doing Annam Gourmet, are doing another expansion wave of stores opening, Hanoi, other provinces, and more in Ho Chi Minh. So, Annam Gourmet, for anyone who's, I'm sure a lot of your listeners probably know. I don't know if they know Annam Gourmet, but these kind of premium grocery outlets, and just take this more generally, for me, it's like as good as being in Zurich in a Swiss premium supermarket. It's that good. So again, there's a lot of perceptions that and bubbles that can be burst, I think, around these markets. And the best way to do that is get decision makers in and do
yes,
retail tours and we've had brands, who've been in the market for years. They've struggled with their merchandising and their positioning. International directors come in and they're so clear about how they want to move it forward. And they're then so passionate internally. It's a large organization, but it moves the dial. So for me, that's the big challenge is we need to get decision makers in. And they used to always fly to China. And now it
yeah,
seems like fewer are flying to China. So how are they
less
going to
often.
position and see kind of Southeast Asia,
Yeah. No, I think I fully agree. You don't get that feel of the market and you don't get the emotion of the market without actually going and seeing for yourself. And realistically speaking, you also, regardless of who you're working with as your importer, you're not going to build that relationship with them on a cultural level unless you actually come in and show to those guys that for you as a brand, Vietnam has a certain level of priority in the company and that you take it seriously
Mm.
and that you want to honor his work by making that kind of a visit. It's not just about checking up and seeing if he's doing the right things, is it? It's also about him feeling like he's having a visit and he can show you his work and you've got that much closer cooperation after you've had that, and you've got those opportunities of really seeing how the market ticks, which I
I'm,
think a
I'm
lot of people don't understand.
I totally agree. I hope I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name. Tom from Faith in Nature, International Director at Faith
Oh,
in Nature, is one of our clients, and the perfect example. You know, very forward thinking, comes out, and it's so well received when he goes into the rooms at
mhm.
Guardian himself to express clearly the brand's interest
Yes,
in investing and co-investing with the modern trade retailer, giving the presentation, um, and I think it all comes alive and it's more real, you know. And we did a kind of SCA tour, so we did locations across like Singapore and Malaysia and Vietnam. But I totally agree. I totally agree. I think it makes a huge difference to have brand representatives coming directly into market.
yeah,
And I think there'll be, you know, that there'll be more of these kind of trade missions and retail kind of immersive experiences. It's just very exciting, and I think that's why I'm excited around the story we're telling on LinkedIn, because it feels to me there's a lot of people talking about the macros of Vietnam and Southeast Asia, right?
yeah,
Kind of diplomacy, politics, industry, big picture trends. But there's a massive gap for micro commercials. For like, well, how do you actually operate in these markets? Like,
yes,
what
yes,
is the specific industry landscape? And then looking at specific commercial data on that, seems to be a big gap. So that's what we're trying to fill at Asia Circles in terms of our content planning and my content planning. It's like, let's just talk about things that we find really fascinating, because you know in China there's so much of
there's
that.
so much, there
People
is so
don't
much
talk
of that.
macro in China now, right? It's
No,
all
it's all
micro, industry
micro,
specifics, channel
niche,
specifics.
yes,
It's
yeah,
niche. Everyone has their very specific niche. It's usually, I mean, before it was the way you survived really in China, right? Because there was so much business. You would you would then just kind of collaborate within that niche, and a lot of business would just fall on your lap because you were in that niche. But so I think I'm not saying we go that niche in Vietnam at this stage, but I'm just saying, like, I look at it at least kind of by industry, or look at it by specific brand case study, or
yeah,
look at it by specific retailer, and learn. And you know, again, like, I guess it takes you back to being a copywriter at the first agency. It's the same thing. It's the same skill. It's like just research. You learn by researching. You learn by researching. So that's I find that really inspiring, and I like that. I like trying to learn,
mm,
because and you know, I think you stay humble, and it always humbles you when you enter a new market. And the best, for me, the best way you can be is like curious, humble. Don't expect to transplant what works for you in your home market, and everyone says this, or indeed any other market, into a new market. You've got to listen, and then respond to what's in front of you. Um, and but curiosity is probably the most important quality, I'd say.
yeah,
Curiosity of the culture and the people and the way they do business as well. And not being so afraid to get it wrong, you know. And I don't know, I try not to overthink stuff too much. You know, if you're pitching brands and you go into like the retailer's office, you go into the big corporate boardroom and you've got a suitcase. It's a little bit like kind of opening your coat, isn't it? And you've got like brands here. Like it's not, but you've also, that's how it works. You know, there's a marketplace culture in these markets. There's always a bit of haggle, and you know, so that's it. That's it. And it is professionalizing, but that's what I try and come back to, that like just caring about what I do, and caring about maintaining those relationships, and then all the kind of financial bits tend to fall in place around that, with people who are very strong in finances, obviously. You know what I mean?
yeah. So what are let's say, what are the biggest mistakes that you see brands making when they try and enter into Vietnam? Or maybe what are also the things that you see companies who thrive in the market, what is it that they do especially well that makes them successful? Is there some kind of common denominator in there?
I think like clear origin story does very well, because you've got brands
Yeah.
like Cocoon who embody that, right? And it's just there's such a clear, well, they even say the Vietnam original, right, or Vietnam origin. But it's also like all Vietnamese fruits and ingredients and coffee, de la coffee, and it's beautiful, and the way it's presented in like three-dimensional. It's almost like three-dimensional drawings on the shelf. It's it's really fascinates me. So I think brands like Cocoon are a great example of that. So I think heritage and a clear identity. Yeah, it's not enough just to slap your flag on something in terms of origin, but I think that storytelling, and then I think we touched on it, but O2O, omni, kind of off channel to online, online to offline. That how you strike that balance of an offline retail hybrid with a digital activation
And lots
is
of touch
really
points.
important.
Lots of touch points. I mean, maybe not as many as China, but you still need probably more touch points than you would have in Germany, because you've got to build some kind of relationship.
Yeah, and remember these are they're busy cultures as well. Like
Yeah.
they're busy, and they're kind of stacked. I think I was talking about Outside, for example, and saying that actually these ad activations add text to the landscape, because it's all textures. you
Yeah.
know so when you market, you kind of have to fit into that texture. It's a digital activation within that texture, or like an offline retail trade activation. You've got to fit into that, and just great creative, right? Great creative. Like we manufacture gondola ends, and we work with our brands to design all the creative around the gondola end. And then localization of language. Do we, are we gonna do Vietnamese on the gondola end? How's that going to work with the typefacing? So just really great creative, because you don't get much time to make that impression.
No.
You really don't, and that links back to what I'm saying about the busyness of the culture, and it's only going to become more and more competitive. So you don't have a lot of time to make that impression. So
So
you
go
need,
to
I think,
Vietnam
brands need
now.
to, yeah, it's like, yeah. So how do you make the impression? I think it's a clear story. It's a bit like when you meet someone. It's like humans, right? It's like you shake someone's hand, and it's like what part of yourself are you going to convey in those first 5 seconds? And if there's no clear story, or maybe it comes down to emotional resonance. And the other point I'd make is like, that's localization, isn't it? That's understanding what resonates emotionally with your consumer in the Vietnamese market, which is
Yeah.
which is really the crux of it. And
Yeah.
that's I think where curiosity and then building great local teams, working with great local partners comes in.
Yeah. But I would also, going to the question that I've just kind of flagged up
That threw
in the
me off a bit, that
screen.
question. I was like,
Yes,
that's
it does really
lovely,
require
but it comes up on the screen, like,
yeah, magic.
yeah.
And yes, it does really require explanation. It shouldn't require explanation that every culture needs that kind of understanding and individual approach. But sadly, it does still require that, because lots of brands, they have experience in one market, and often the market that they have the experience in is maybe Singapore, it might be Hong Kong, or it might be the kind of protected bubble that is China e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce. And then they're not really, it's not the same as doing business in out in the wild with Vietnam, or with Indonesia, or Malaysia, Thailand, or even mainland China, actually general import, simply because you are not dealing always, on one, you're dealing with a very cosmopolitan public, and the other you're not necessarily. And I think that companies tend to forget that. They think that the experience that they've had in Singapore or in Hong Kong on a 2-day visit, that is the whole of Asia, and it isn't.
I actually think that's a great question, because on a level I agree with the question. I'm like, it is obvious, right? Like intellectually, it's an obvious point, but actually, from my experience in large organizations, it's not embodied.
No,
it's
it
not
isn't.
it's not an actualized reality, right? It's like everyone understands it maybe intellectually, but they don't then live that through their
No.
business decisions. That's, I think, the point. They
And I
don't
think they
live
don't.
it through their bit, whether that's the appointment of the right local partner, building of a local team. Is it, for example, when we ran China, very bottom up. We listened to what the Chinese team said and we adapted accordingly. We didn't accept everything the Chinese team said, but we used that to guide our principles and our decision making. You'd be amazingly surprised at how many brands don't do that. They dictate top down,
I think
assuming
even
with
in
an
Europe,
assumption that it's going to work copy paste from their most successful home market. So I actually think it is something that needs to be talked about, although intellectually it's an obvious point.
yeah, and I think that even in Europe, lots of brands think that because they have a strong brand heritage or a strong brand story, that they don't actually need to act any differently if they go from France to Poland or if they go from Germany to Greece, because they believe that it's all Europe and therefore people will understand that they are a French, German, Polish brand, whatever it happens to be, and therefore they don't need to adjust for that. And then it just gets exponentially more of a difference once they get into Asia.
Yeah, but APAC is, I mean, it's a good way to kind of like wrap up, isn't it? Like APAC is just so inspiring. It's the fastest growing middle classes in the world. The technology innovation, the adaptation and the transplanting of really innovative technologies. Some of which are from China, some of which are from Singapore. Like for example, like TikTok Shop is Chinese algorithm fundamentally designed in China. Shopee is adapting, but Shopee is fundamentally Singaporean, right?
Victorian,
So
yeah.
they're developing their own live streaming ecosystem, which is incredibly effective and is actually holding TikTok at bay right now, which is I think lots of people didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah,
But don't underestimate the innovation and then the response to innovation, right? So it's really exciting. It's really exciting. You look at the TikTok huge activation they did for Double 11 in the center of Ho Chi Minh, in the main central square, 200 square meter live streaming studio, just huge. It probably is it 200 square meter? Would that be ridiculously big? I just said a stupid number there.
that's
200
very
square
big at all.
meters.
200,
Is that too
200
big?
square
Well,
meters.
imagine that. A
200 square meters
spaceship.
isn't that big at all.
Oh, it isn't that big. I'm thinking like something like, oh, you said it's like 2 kilometers, a 2 kilometer wide live streaming studio. But it's exciting, televised, it's broadcast, there's a live audience, there's a stage. This I don't know. I just think this is what we need to, and maybe it's what we had captured in China, and maybe it has been lost. And there's still amazing scope within China, and amazing niches, and amazing levels of refinement. Probably the most advanced consumer market in the world, and the largest consumer market in the world. Like it's still fascinating, but I probably am slightly more drawn right now to those emerging markets.
Yeah.
I think it suits my kind of energy and my personal energy more.
So, just as one wrap up question before I ask you to tell us what services you offer and who should reach out to you, but give us a quick prediction for 2025 and the Vietnam markets. Which categories are going to be hottest? Um, and if you've got anything else that you think for Southeast Asia that's going to be really hot in
Yeah, healthcare
2025.
is going to be really hot. It is already hot. Will continue to be hot. Mother Baby, really, really hot. Konkan obviously launched on TikTok, and they got number one within Mother Baby on TikTok, didn't they? So that big transition into e-commerce for Mother Baby, that's super exciting.
That's
And
super, yeah.
men's and women's shoes, absolutely skyrocketing on e-commerce. Men's much more than women's actually. Men's shoes was the fastest growing EC growth subcategory. So shoes, mother baby nutrition, and obviously cosmetics continues to, is always is always been, it's been in this ascendancy category for the last year. So no, I think the kind of the wider categories will do well, but then the sub niches like specific apparel or subcategories within healthcare like probiotics remains incredibly strong. Yeah, I think it will be a strong year cross category.
Very good, very good. So tell us very briefly before we wrap up, because we're already kind of at the top of the hour. We've already been talking for an hour, or you have. So tell us, who should contact you at Asia Circles? What kind of clients can you help best?
Yeah, I'd say we want to work with brands that want to invest in their marketing.
Mhm.
We want to invest in their stock and buy their goods, and we want to build in partnership. So we want to buy the brand's goods, and we want them to support us and co-invest with us in the marketing, with a long-term vision. 4, 5, 6, 7 year
Mhm.
growth plans, sustainable price structure, brand equity-led approach, highly collaborative with us, and who just like fit with our culture as well. Like we want to work with innovative brands that are doing something a bit different, have a clear value proposition for the market, and who can connect with us on a personal level as well. And that's what we're looking for. um and I think, to be honest, I think it's, you just attract what you put out in the world somewhat, don't you? So I think those kind of brands are coming to us. It might be that they're in the market, but they need help merchandising, re-merchandising. They need then help with their e-commerce activation. They might be totally new to the market and they want an omni-channel approach from non-trade to e-commerce. That's principally our target, I'd say.
Cool. Sounds very good.
I
In
hope I
which
said something meaningful in the waffle.
in which case, I would say thank you very much for your very enthusiastic and valuable insights this afternoon. It's really been a pleasure to have you on.
No worries, Kathy. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who found time to listen to this live, and also to those of you who are taking the time to watch on the replay. And we will catch you next time with another guest back in 2025. It will be before we have the next episode. So thank you and bye.